Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Beavers Edge publisher Brenden Slaughter here, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson. We're back here on another edition of the Edge podcast for previewing Oregon State in the Baton Rouge Regional this weekend. TJ and I are going to dive into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk some ball. It's going to be a fun conversation. Thanks to everyone for rejoining here on the Edge podcast. TJ, it's been a while, man, since we connected on our podcast. How you been? Good to see you.
I'm good. It should be a very entertaining weekend of baseball.
I'm looking forward to it.
I will say, man, like talk about premier college baseball places to go. I mean, This is it. It's not Stillwater, which is good. You put a thumbs up to that.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, for those who are going, and I actually do not have the pleasure of being able to head down to Baton Rouge. I saw some people posted on the damn board, kind of their thoughts and their comments on it, and for lack of better terms, TJ, it really is one of the cathedrals of college baseball in the sense I don't know if it's exactly the biggest, but I know it's one of the bigger college baseball stadiums in America. For those who are listening, we're really familiar with Goss Stadium, right? Goss Stadium set a lot of really great attendance records this year, recent years. Goss, if they get to standing room capacity, somewhere around 3,500, maybe pushing 36. TJ,
it has gone above 4,000 a handful.
Okay. Yeah. So there you go. I thought they did, but I didn't want to say without knowing for sure. TJ, do you know what Alex Box Stadium in Baton Rouge holds?
14,000.
You're right on the money. So just
pretty big.
Roughly think of a stadium that's about, at Goss at max capacity, 3 times as big, right? Yeah. And, I think when you kind of think about that, it can be, a little bit of an intimidating environment of sorts, but, compared to some of the areas around the Pac-12, TJ, because no one even around the conference has a stadium of that size.
No, it's very uniquely SEC. I mean, there's the only conference that has parks that big. I don't think there's a single one in another conference unless you want to count Creighton. I don't, because they play they play right in Omaha. So I don't think I can count that. So otherwise, it's not close, and it makes for a very unique, very fun pro-like atmosphere. Pro, but also pro with the college energy, pro size college energy, and it really makes for great. We're going to see some really good talent on the field this weekend. It's a decent field. Besides LSU, I kind of like the field for Oregon State in terms of, advancing into the winner's bracket. The problem is, I think of just looking at the first part and looking how the bracket will shake out. The Beavers are the 2 seed. They're going to get Sam Houston State on Friday. Interesting matchup with Sam Houston State. They hit the ball pretty well. Not the best pitching team. They're the WAC champions. So they've had a really good season, won 38 games as well. But, and you look at this just for the Beavers, right? You win against Sam Houston State. I mean, you're going to have to beat the best pitcher in college baseball in the winner's bracket on Saturday. That's what you're going to have to do to advance in this bracket. That's a pretty tough task. If you're talking about tough draws for just a regional, you're to advance in the winner's bracket, you're most likely going to face a team that was number 1 for 12 weeks this season and has the number 1 and number 2 picks in the upcoming MLB draft on their roster. That's pretty tough. I mean, go look at all the other top seeds. I mean, they don't even have those guys on their roster. It's pretty insane, and it's going to be a big hill to climb.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, looking ahead to LSU and what they potentially are going to have, to throw in the Beavers' way. And as you mentioned, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but I looked at the pitcher that you mentioned when I was doing
Paul
some research.
Skeens.
Yes, there you go. I knew it was an interesting lot. Skeens, yeah. And you're right. He is a talented stud. However, I'll counter with this, TJ. I know there were a lot of Beaver fans, and rightfully so, who when the brackets came out, thought the Beavers were maybe unfairly placed into one of the top 8 national seeds as regional instead of being placed into one of the regionals 9 through 16. And to an extent, I understand where they're coming from. Oregon State, I think, was one of the, the better 2 seeds across. And, despite the Pac-12 tournament, their RPI was still one of the higher in the Pac-12. They were in the mix to host until the final weekend, so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, you're right. For all the reasons you mentioned, like LSU being a great program, you and I mentioned the atmosphere, the fans. LSU is, not the biggest college baseball stadium in America, but it's up there. They create a raucous environment. And, actually from the times that a couple years back when some LSU fans came up to Goff Stadium when Oregon State was hosting, there were, I'll give them credit. They travel extremely well, and I expect them to put together a huge atmosphere down there. TJ, knowing that LSU is keenly eyeing on Oregon State, is there a chance they could slip up and drop their first game? Because that happens all the time where you get teams who are eyeing that second game, save their ace, and to case in point, that has happened to Oregon State a time or two in a regional. So, everything's goes like, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, for lack of better terms.
It's an interesting point you bring up here. I'm trying to pull up this stat I saw earlier. So LSU is going to get to open with Tulane.
Yes.
Tulane finished the season, team. Brenden, what did Tulane finish the season at?
They finished, I think, about 16 games under 500, but they're a hot team, TJ.
They're 19-40. They're the first 40-loss team ever to play in a regional, ever.
They're a hot team, bro.
So there's a stat here about losing team. I'm trying to find it. It's like teams with a losing record. Here we go. Teams that have a losing record that played in regionals. Overall, there are so 37 teams in the last 16 tournaments to have a losing record. 27 of those teams did not win a single game. That's 75% of teams with a sub 500 record lost both games in a regional. 7 of those teams went 1-2, managing to win a game somewhere along, and then just 2 teams made it to the winners bracket and won multiple games and lost in the final. None has advanced out of the regional, which those odds aren't great.
Sure,
we're expecting an upset for LSU against Tulane. It's pretty tough to see. It's pretty tough to see.
Hey, TJ, I don't know about
but
you.
Hey, anything. You're right. Anything's possible. Absolutely anything is possible.
For sure. And you should know this, TJ, as well as anybody, because you're an awesome pro baseball savant with the Marine Layer podcast. Got to give you a quick plug for all Mariner fans out there. But this, unlike postseason college football or postseason college basketball, postseason college baseball is its own enigma because the best team doesn't win. Case in point with the fact the number 1 overall seed hasn't won it all in the NCAA tournament, I think, since 1997, if I'm remembering.
99, I think.
Okay, 99.
It was Miami in 99.
So, and with, granted now has teams won as 3 seeds or 2, sure. But I think it's just kind of interesting that, like, baseball's unique. It's different. You just need a couple pitchers. I think back to, all the times we've seen national seeds go down. When Stanford was a national seed, they lost a few years back. I think back to when Oregon State was the number 1 overall seed and lost to UC Irvine at Goff Stadium in 2014. Sorry to bring that up, Beaver fans, but it is, well worth mentioning as far as just how nutty postseason baseball can be if you have 1 really good ace or 2 really good pitchers, and you catch a team who's maybe in the slump, maybe haven't seen what you're pitching on the mound, used to being more of a fastball hitting team, and you throw changes or any number of factors. But that's the beauty of postseason baseball. I mean, I totally get what you're saying, not discounting that LSU is a great team, but that's why you play the game, right?
Yeah. Number 1 seed has not made it to the College World Series since the Beavers won it all. I mean,
wow. See, there you go.
We just want to put it. I mean, UCLA the next year lost. Arkansas in 21 lost. Tennessee last year, who people were like, "Oh, this is like almost as good, if not better, than the 2017 Oregon State team." They didn't even make it out of their own super regional. Like it is pretty crazy. But asking a team that went 19-40,
I know, right?
19-40. That's crazy. In postseason play, a team that struggles that much uh, makes it to a regional. Most losses ever for a regional team. That's a pretty high bar. So I
Yeah.
don't know. We'll see. It would definitely that would definitely stir up the regional a little bit. And if Tulane somehow managed to pull that off, then Oregon State's odds of winning the regional jump astronomically. But
Right.
still a lot hinges on that if we would look forward winners bracket game on Saturday if Oregon State were to win.
Sure, sure. And I think, we'll obviously get a little deeper into Sam Houston State here or Sam Houston, excuse me. Still having to correct myself there, TJ. They removed the
Did
state.
they take state? They did?
Yeah,
Interesting.
they removed the state not too long ago. So it's just Sam Houston now. So I believe that this is like the first year that they've done it. But we talked a little bit about Paul Skinas, but let's talk a little bit about the hitters that Oregon State will potentially have to keep at bay, TJ, at least with LSU to start. You mentioned Dylan Cruz and how high level and high profile, and you said he's going to be a high draft pick too. They've got a couple guys. I'm trying to look at the matchup here. They got one. Yeah, about five,
Yeah.
six guys who are hitting over 300. I'm assuming that was Cruz that you had the high praise for.
Yeah. Well, he's going to go number one in this draft. I mean, it's been consensus, I think, since the start of the season. He's going to be 1-1 to the Pittsburgh Pirates in July before the All-Star game up here. I mean, they got Tommy White was a first-team All-ACC last year who transferred there. He has 20 home runs.
Oh. Yeah, 91 RBI, TJ, too.
Yeah,
he's hitting the heck out of the ball.
He is a masher, yeah. So he set a lot of freshman home run records last year. He was close at least. Yeah, and their team, Brenden, is like overall they get on base. They as a team get on base 44% of the time. That's pretty absurd. As a team, I think 7 of their 9 guys in their starting lineup have an on base percentage over 400. They're pretty hard to get out, right? There's some balance there. I think the weakness for LSU is the pitching outside of Paul Skeens because they did kind of struggle down the stretch. They went 500 over the last 3 weeks of the season, essentially, or 3-4 weeks of the season. After they were number one, but in terms of strengths, I mean, they mash and they have in terms of top line guys. I mean, it's good stuff. So. There's a lot of stuff there for LSU that Oregon State's going to have to deal with, and especially for an Oregon State staff that is pretty short on the pitching side.
Right, and as TJ just mentioned, we'll go ahead and mention that as well. That Mitch Canham, when we met with him yesterday down at Goff Stadium, he mentioned that Jacob Kmatz and Jaron Hunter will not be available this weekend. So no tease, no hiding it, no. He could be available. Looking at you, football team. Ruled them out right away, TJ. So that tells me that those guys are kind of dealing with something somewhat significant, and that's big because those are 2 guys who, the Beavers have missed each of those guys their own way. Jacob Kmatz, maybe not as consistent as the Beavers would have liked this year, but a guy with a ton of starting experience under his belt. And then, Hunter, who I thought had really started to come on before his injury too. So from what we've heard, it sounds like we could expect to see Ben Ferrer in a starting role again, most likely AJ Lattery as well, if we're to go to a 3-game situation with him kind of sliding into the Sunday spot. Then after that, should they need to start another game, it could be a whole handful of guys potentially.
Yeah.
It just kind of depends. And, they've got a somewhat deep pitching room as far as guys they've thrown this year. Maybe not a lot of guys who have done unbelievably great things. And, we kind of saw the bullpen get knocked around a little bit down in Scottsdale this last weekend. So I think all that considering, the vibe that we got from the Beavers yesterday, TJ, was, they brought the guys back. They let them get away from baseball for a couple days, kind of mentally reset after, what most would call a bit of a disappointing, not even a bit, a very disappointing showing down in Scottsdale. Regardless of how well Arizona State played, you gave up, double-digit runs in both games after, having an ERA that was in the high 3s, low 4s for most of the last month. So I think that kind of shock to the system, for lack of better terms, TJ, is kind of going to be good for Oregon State and kind of refocus everything and, kind of laser them into playing at their highest level, which is what they're going to need to do to come out of the regional with a win. I'll let you get your thoughts on that one. We'll dive into Sam Houston a
Mhm.
little bit.
I think the good thing about that is, right, like you didn't win the tournament. So like your hopes of hosting was pretty much resided on winning that tournament. As soon as it didn't happen, I mean, going 2-0, you kind of shrug
Yeah,
your shoulders. You get more rest at that point, and you didn't have to spend the whole weekend, wearing out your bullpen a little bit. So instead, a lot of
exactly.
those guys got a lot more of a rest, and they're going to be needed. So okay, Trent Sellers is looking at on Friday, right? So Trent
Yep.
Sellers is going to
Yep.
start the first game.
Confirmed.
The biggest thing about Ben Ferrer sliding into a starting spot is if you really need to lock down a game and get like 2 shutout innings from a guy like you really need. So it's going to be like a lot on Ryan Brown, I would think, in game
Right.
one to really nail down that first win. Because if you need Ben Ferrer in game two, he's not going to pitch on Friday. He's going to need to save his energy for Saturday. So it's okay. If you go through if you get into the winner's bracket, you win those first 2 games, that's important because then just
Yes.
need to win one more game to advance. That's it. Once you go in those first 2 games, you need to win one more game to continue going. And that's where having AJ Lattery is good. It's like, good, okay. And the goal is not to get to that bullpen game because that bullpen game could be
Ugly.
trouble.
Yeah,
That's where you had saying, oh, it would have been nice to have Jacob Camacho, Jaron Hunter. Well, you don't have either of
exactly.
them now, so the
No,
length is really not there. So it is really, really, really important to. I mean, yeah, it's important to win to advance, but in terms of setting your pitching staff up to finish the regional, that's important too. This is not health wise, they're not set up to go through the losers bracket. They're not.
No, not at all. Now, granted, I will say this again: nuttier things and crazier things have happened. Again, TJ,
Uh-huh.
if specifically with Oregon State baseball, if you need just a lesson on how things just sometimes don't make any sense, go back and look at the 2007 Oregon State baseball team led by head coach or then catcher, now head coach Mitch Canham. Oregon State got into the tournament with a losing Pac-12 record. They were one of the last teams in the tournament, ended up winning the whole darn thing that year. So it really it is unique in itself, as far as like, being able to, find guys that all of a sudden pitch well or pitch not. But like you said, if the situation, TJ, were different and you had one of Kamatz or Hunter available, in a perfect world, you're saving Trent Sellers for LSU, are you not?
Not necessarily. No,
Yeah, like I'm just
because
curious what your thoughts were on
they
that.
kind of shifted the strategy for the final week of the season. Kind of led you to think maybe Trent Sellers wasn't going to be pitching the most important game
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that. I mean, because they didn't start him in the tournament. He got a week off, right? Like
Maybe because of
he was going to pitch if they
rest, though,
needed him
right?
to. But if they absolutely wanted to win those conference tournament games, he
Right.
would have pitched.
Sure. Sure.
But instead, they did not. So I don't know. I can't necessarily say that for sure. I don't know. That's
Yeah, because
it's
like
because Trent. It's not like Trent was lighting the world on fire in the final month of the season. So he's
sure.
had a good season. He struck out a lot of batters, but in terms of run prevention, he was scuffling a little
No,
bit
and
down the stretch.
I think that's why they wanted to give him that week off, at least from what we had heard from Mitch. And like you said, he didn't necessarily but quote unquote, he's probably at this point he is the ace of your staff. There's no question. There's nobody else there, quite literally left, other than AJ Lattery, who's like, hey, I was the Tuesday guy coming into the week, guys. What's up? So it's definitely interesting. But yeah, that was always, something that I've seen. I've covered a lot of postseason Oregon State baseball, and you've had times where Oregon State would roll with their Saturday guy on Friday and kind of save that ace for the second matchup. But I don't think Oregon State has that luxury. With Sellers kind of being their guy, you can't really gamble on throwing somebody who's not Trent Sellers against Sam Houston, who we'll go ahead and look at right now, TJ. They can hit the crap out of the baseball, for lack of better terms. They're a pretty good offensive team, and one of the hotter teams, in the field, as well, as they had to race through their conference tournament to get the automatic bid. they would not have made the tournament if it hadn't been for their auto bid. And TJ stole the bid from Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
GCU stole that bid and then now got the automatic bid. They hit the ball well. I think if there's an advantage, there's maybe a little bit more of an advantage against their pitchers, as their team ERAs in the fives, as opposed to their team batting average is just over 320, 319. So I think if Oregon State's biggest matchup is going to be, can they score enough runs and can their pitchers limit offense enough? Because we saw this last week in Scottsdale. I don't think that was Oregon State's best baseball of the year by any stretch. But the offense seems to be hitting the ball pretty well right now. It's good to see Gavin Turley back seeing the ball well. Across the board, it seems like, there's not a lot of guys going into slumps right now or anything like that. But TJ, the bullpen's going to have to prove themselves if Oregon State is going to win a regional. I mean, without a doubt, after Scottsdale, I think the onus is completely on the bullpen. I think they have to show up, because I think the offense will be there to give you enough. But the bullpen certainly can't allow double-digit runs in Baton Rouge, or it's going to be a long, long, long weekend.
Yeah, based on what we've seen, I'd say the Oregon State offense is, I don't know, 8 runs a game this weekend. Probably.
Somewhere in there.
Right? You're
somewhere in there.
You're down 2 starting pitchers, right? And even if the bullpen pitches well, the bullpen is going to be tired if you make it through the weekend. They are. So your offense going to need to swing it well, as you said. There's not a whole lot of things Sam Houston State does well on the mound. I mean, middle of the they don't strike out a lot of batters. They're middle of the pack in walks. In terms of limiting base runners, they're outside the top 100 nationally in that. Run prevention too is not great as well. So it's a pretty average pitching staff that we've seen Oregon State really crush this year, and I don't think scoring runs is going to be the issue. And it helps that Travis Bazana, Garrett Forster, the top 4 of that lineup is really locked in and hitting the ball all over the yard, no problem. It's just, again, how much you're going to get out of that pitching staff this weekend against an offense in, Sam Houston State. They don't strike out a whole lot. They hit, like you said, they hit for a high average. They're in the top 51 teams in the country getting on base. They slug in the top 50 as well. As an overall offensive team, they're pretty solid and pretty complete. So it's going to be something to look out for.
No doubt. And I think, again, more than anything, Oregon State also, TJ, has to travel the furthest of all these teams. It's not like Sam Houston has to go all that far. It's not that Tulane has to go all that far. So, the Beavers, they have to travel, right? That's going to be a long journey. And, I haven't looked ahead to see what the weather's going to be like specifically Friday night, but knowing Baton Rouge in June, probably a little humid, maybe a lot humid, depends on how thick and sticky the air is that night. But, it's just going to be a completely different environment, TJ, than these guys had played in. It's usually pretty tough for some of those West Coast guys to go back into East Coast situations, especially this time of year, really humid areas. I think of like Gainesville, Baton Rouge, Starkville, some of the, areas in the South, of course. But, if Oregon State can kind of have a strong mental toughness, I think they can get by Sam Houston, as you mentioned. I mean, I think Sam Houston will throw them, they'll test them for sure, but I still think Oregon State can kind of, be the better team and then set up a really massive game with LSU that will determine one team goes to the winner's bracket. One team will obviously go to the loser's bracket. Oregon State has gone down to Baton Rouge for regionals before, came up, I think just a game short, if I'm remembering correctly. So some good history there. Honestly, TJ, I'm looking forward to this weekend. I think it's going to be an awesome weekend of baseball. I love postseason college baseball. There's nothing else like it. And, folks, settle down. Get in front of your TV, flip between some channels, and for this weekend, you may need to make sure you have a ESPN Plus subscription. It's going to be exciting. I think it's going to be a good weekend for Oregon State, getting able to match up with some great baseball teams, TJ, and I'm excited for it, man. It's going to be good.
Yeah, and if we take a peek on the other side of the bracket for what a potential super regional could look like, if you're just curious to look ahead. I mean, there's 3 top 30 RPI teams in the other regional across the way, hosted by Kentucky. But the number 2 RPI, West Virginia, I mean, was very like they were in hosting position.
Yes,
pretty much until the last week of the season, until they kind of collapsed a bit and they fell out into a 2 seed. And then Indiana's a top 30 RPI team as well. It's a good group of teams across the way on the bracket. So something to, I guess, peek ahead to as well if you manage to get past LSU.
No, it's going to be, and like TJ said, the matchup itself, like if us in our head, TJ, are already matching up Oregon State and LSU, what do you think the coaches are thinking in their head too? So I think no disrespect to Sam Houston or Tulane. Watch, I'll have egg on my face next week, TJ. Tulane will win the Baton Rouge Regional, or Sam Houston.
No, they won't. No, they
won't. But yeah, no, it's gonna be an exciting round of baseball, and I'm certainly excited to bring you guys coverage for BeaversEdge.com. It's gonna be an exciting weekend. Make sure to stay locked. TJ, thanks for joining me on this edition of the podcast, man. Always good. We'll catch up next week and either wrap up baseball or talk about the Supers, man. So looking forward to it. And obviously we'll be doing some podcasts throughout the summer just to keep you busy, my man.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks again for listening to this edition of the Edge podcast. We'll be back next week with either baseball season wrap up or baseball look ahead to the Super Regional. So again, for TJ Mathewson, this is Brenden Slaughter signing off on this edition of the Edge podcast.